Matthew Dickerson is with us for his weekly talk on technology. G'day, Matthew. How are you?
Yeah, good. Thanks, Chris. Always good to be chatting to you and all your listeners.
Yes, and satellites, are they the answer to Australia's bushfire problems? Not that we've had a problem with bushfires this summer. It's sort of been okay, hasn't it?
Well, it has been okay this summer. Obviously, we don't have to think back very far to think of the last time we had a pretty bad summer. I think about 18 million hectares were burnt in last summer, as in not the one just gone. So one of the solutions that's being proposed, obviously we think as the climate changes, we're going to get more intense bushfires, they're going to happen more often. So we need some way of trying to curb that. And so one of the solutions that's being proposed, and it's actually in operation in California already, is using satellites. And the idea here, and the boast by the particular company that's working on this, is that they can pick up a new bushfire start within typically 60 seconds of it starting. Now you can imagine 60 seconds after a lightning strike, for example, it isn't a bushfire, it's just a very small fire. And that way they can attack that in a much easier way. And obviously they've got a pretty good chance of putting it out. Once it's been going for maybe 10 minutes, maybe an hour, maybe a few hours, maybe overnight, then it's pretty hard to start tackling them. And that's when we see, I see that footage of water bombers come along and they drop an incredible amount of water on a fire, and it just doesn't look like it does anything at all. So the technology that's being used here is quite interesting. One of the scientists that's worked on this has spent most of his life looking for supernovae out there in the galaxies far, far away, looking for things that are billions of light years away. But the technology they've used to try and get rid of all that background noise, if you like, and try and pick up some of those supernovae is the same technology they're using to try and pick out a little tiny spot of fire in a photograph that's been taken from a satellite. So it's great to see that translation, if you like, from science from one area to another. The idea is that those satellites keep spinning around, low Earth orbit satellites. They take those photos. Every minute they report those photos. When something's detected, that's when it goes into overdrive to focus on that particular area to see if it's a fire, and then alert the authorities, and then hopefully they can be put out before they get started.
Very, very interesting.
Yeah.
Now, onto electric vehicles. Which tiny EV is beating Tesla as the best-selling EV in the world so far this year?
Well, look, the Tesla has had some pretty impressive numbers so far this year. 35,000 sales in the first 2 months for the Model 3 alone. So that's impressed a lot of the people who are watching this space. But a Chinese-based company has made a little car called a Wuling, and they've sold 56,000 of these in the first 2 months of this year. Now, there's a fair bit of difference between the Wuling and a Tesla Model 3, for example. The Wuling sells in China for equivalent dollars, $5,700. It gets about 170 kilometres per charge, and it's got an absolute top speed of 100 kilometres an hour. Interestingly enough, it is a very small car. It only weighs 660 kilograms, can seat 4 people, but I think we'd be fairly cosy if 4 of us sat in one of those. They're designed to be a small little runaround. The Tesla Model 3, in equivalent dollars, about $66,000, a range of 400 kilometres, and it's about a tonne heavier at 1,600 kilograms. So fair bit of difference there, but I think this is where we'll see the real, I suppose, progression of EVs in some of these small cars, because as a town runaround, as something that just does a small commute each day, that's where an EV is at its absolute best. So this particular company, the Hongguang Mini EV, or as I said, the Wuling EV, is a joint venture by a Chinese company and General Motors out of America. So expect to see a lot more of these around China. They're only sold in China at this stage, but at some stage in the future we might see them come to other markets. But at the moment, they're flat out trying to satisfy the appetite in China.
I was reading the latest edition of the NRMA magazine, and the editor was saying that the federal government is finally going to ramp up the production of EVs in Australia.
Yeah, they haven't done a lot yet, but hopefully they'll come to their senses, because at the moment there are many EV manufacturers around the world that just don't bring their cars to Australia because there's not the appetite from the government. So the car manufacturers think we'll go to places that want us to be there.
Now, who are sex offenders targeting on dating apps, Matthew?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, you just don't think about some of these things, Chris, but sex offenders at the moment are targeting single parents. And so when people put up that they're a single parent and they may have some pictures of their kids there, for example, then some of these sex offenders think, well, if they're single parents, they might be at work, they might have their kids come home from school and they might be alone for an hour or two. So then they're starting to target these particular people. Some people are putting photos up of their kids, which is great. They're very proud of their kids. They might be down at a sporting field. They might do something funny in the home and they put photos up. But of course, most of those photos have some data associated with them that will often give the location of that photo. So when people might be putting up fairly simple information about themselves, photos of themselves, their kids, without knowing it, they might be sharing their location, they might be sharing information about their kids, and of course, as part of all that, they're saying that there may be times when their kids are home alone. So the authorities are really saying, just be really careful of what you put up on a dating app. Try and think about it, and this is hard, Chris, but try and think about it as if you're a sex offender and what would you be looking for. And so if you kind of get into that mind space, you're really trying to say, well, what shouldn't I be putting up there? So basically, sure, if you're a single parent, use a dating app, but just make sure you're keeping the information as, if you like, vanilla as possible so that you're not sharing too much information until you get to know someone, obviously.
We are talking technology with Matthew Dickerson. And, mate, who will win the battle to put satellite internet into your backyard?
There's some pretty big players battling for this. The two richest guys in the world are battling this out at the moment. Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk are both having a bit of a battle. Starlink is a service that Elon Musk is running with, and there's 10,000 people at the moment who are trialling that service in the US, in Canada and the UK. Now, they're getting some pretty impressive download speeds. They're getting 120 megabits per second. Many people with fibre NBN connections aren't getting that sort of speed, so that's pretty impressive. The real test, though, is after the trial period, and instead of 10,000, you have maybe 100,000 or 1 million or a couple of million people using it. Obviously, it starts to get a bit harder to deliver those type of speeds if you're getting all those people using it. But Starlink is certainly a service that's out there. Amazon has got their equivalent of a satellite service. And of course, the biggest issue with these two and some other ones, there's OneWeb, there's Telesat. They're launching all these satellites. We're not talking about 2 or 3 satellites they're putting up there. We're talking about these different providers launching hundreds. In some cases, they're even talking about several thousand satellites up there. Now, obviously, space is pretty big. There's a fair bit of space up there, Chris. But you've got space junk as one of the issues that's been identified. And one of the reasons they want to put up so many satellites in the sky is obviously they want to be able to deliver levels of service. So you want to be able to have satellite service where you are and make sure you've got enough satellites to cover the service required. But there's also an admission that every now and again, one of these satellites will be taken out by a bit of space junk, by another one of the competitors might run into it. It's a fairly crowded space up there when you get to that low Earth orbit, so you might see a few of these crashing into each other. But Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos are really going to be battling that out. To give you an idea of the pricing, the Starlink service, for example, even for these people running the trial, $4.99 you'll pay upfront to get the service, and you'll pay $99 a month. So it's within reason or reasonable fees in terms of comparing it to an NBN connection. A little bit dearer perhaps, but if you've got nothing, then this isn't a bad solution.
Now, Huawei was going to take over the world until the West intervened. What is its new plan to now generate profits?
Well, you are right, Chris. They were going to take over the world. They were going to take over Samsung as the number one smartphone seller in the world until, as you said, the West intervened in that and threw a few little things like, putting them on the banned entities list by the US Department of Commerce. That puts a bit of a dampener in anyone's plans to dominate the world. So they thought, well, we can't keep selling mobile phones. We've had some problems in places like Australia with our 5G network using our equipment in the 5G network. So what can we do? Well, what they can do is they can use some of their patents. About 20% of all the 5G patents across the world are held by Huawei. And in doing so, they want to be able to license out some of those patents to other manufacturers, some of the people that are their competitors like Samsung, like Apple, and just pick up a small fee on every one of those smartphones sold. So this is their new business model. Now, there's been some issues with that in the past. Qualcomm has had an ongoing battle, a long ongoing battle with Apple because they wanted to charge $7.50 for some of the technology in every phone. It doesn't seem like much, I know, $7.50 when a phone might cost a couple of $1,000s, but that was a battle that Apple didn't want to pay that amount, and that battle went on. Huawei are talking about maybe charging $2.50, US $2.50 per phone that uses any of their patents in the manufacturing process. So it's certainly a dramatic change from selling phones for a couple of $1,000s to then getting back to only getting $2.50 per phone. But at least if they're part of every phone sold across the world, they figure that there's still a reasonable business model for them there. So keep an eye out for that one. We may not be using a Huawei phone, but we may be using parts of Huawei in our phones.
All right, Matthew. Well, if you would like to watch this video, just go across to YouTube and search Matthew Dickerson. He's got all of his other videos there as well. We will talk again next Wednesday, mate. Have a good week.
Sounds great. Thanks, Chris.